Good afternoon. Welcome to this side event for the IRF Summit. My name is Jeremy Barker. I serve at the Religious Freedom Institute as the director of our Middle East Action Team. A privilege to serve as the moderator for today's event. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers, some of whom will be with us here in person, a few who will not be able to make it. So we have kind of two parts of today's program, a couple of videos that will frame this issue, as well as highlight some of the initiatives that both the government and civil society level that are aiming to do, as the title of today's event mentions, of neutralizing the harm of blasphemy laws. And as we've said, it's a religious freedom problem. So we've heard all throughout the summit that we're working to advance religious freedom for everyone, everywhere, and that certainly has legal dimensions, as we see in the laws that we'll be talking about today in Pakistan, in Egypt, in Indonesia, and elsewhere. But it's also a cultural and societal issue as well that has real impacts on the lives of individuals and people. So you'll see that coming together, not just describing the realities of this issue, but really looking at a number of initiatives that are aiming to address that problem in various domains. To set the stage for that, I'd like to share a brief video from a young woman from Pakistan explaining the impact on this, and how it impacts her as a Christian, and her ability both to love her God and love her neighbor. So we'll start this event with that video.
We're doing all the videos.
We need to pause after the first one. Okay.
I remember well. It was a brightly lit room, high ceilings, a beautiful sparkling chandelier, very different from what we look at now. But I remember I was talking to a man. He knew very little about Pakistan. He knew a lot about the other countries around Pakistan, but he didn't know much about Pakistan. But he was interested, he was sympathetic, and I think he had just got drawn into this fabric, into the tapestry of hope and promise and history and culture. And somewhere there was this thread that ran through the story, and he recognized it. A thread that perhaps told a slight story of rejection and sadness, a little bit of betrayal. I probably betrayed one of my own principles when I let it out in front of someone who was so different from me. It was probably the disappointment that I feel as a Pakistani Christian who loves my Pakistan, who dreams for a better tomorrow for my Pakistan, who does everything that she can to see that my Pakistan is a better Pakistan, a greener Pakistan, a purer Pakistan. For that is what it means, Pakistan, land of the pure. And as I told him this story, the sympathetic man, as I told him the story of my Pakistan and the story of the challenge of being a member of a minority community, a community of women, men, and children who live under the sword of this law that's called the 295s A, B, and C, and the challenges that it poses to me flourishing and thriving and being the fullness of Pakistani and the fullness of Christian. And he looked at me and he said, "Are you a citizen of Pakistan?" I choked up. I lost my ability to articulate the words that were whirring around in my head. Simple answer, yes, of course I am. Born and brought up, daughter to Pakistani parents, also born and brought up in Pakistan. Third generation Pakistani. But it was difficult to answer. Perhaps because I felt ashamed of having betrayed the veneer. I felt ashamed of having said anything. But the truth is, all my life, and even today, I continue to sing Pak Sar Zameen Shad Baat, my national anthem, which concludes with the beautiful words, Saya-e Khudaya Zul Jalal, under the shadow of the glory of the God Most High. And as I sing that, I have been encouraged every time that my national anthem was written for every single Pakistani, for every member, every minority. My constitution says that I have the right to be a Christian and to practice my faith. And every year on the 14th of August and on Minorities Day, all the media companies, they pull out the first speech of our beloved guide, our beloved Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who said that we have the right to go to our churches and our temples. Yet, this law hinders and restricts my friends from being the best nurses they can. This law hinders my friends from being the best teachers they can. This law hinders us from so many things. No, there's no law that says I can't be a teacher or I can't be a nurse. But this law fills my people with fear. This law gives us every reason to want to hide, to duck, or to fly. I still remember that chandelier. It became so dull in that moment as everything around me faded. I choked up. The simple answer is yes. I am a Pakistani Christian. I am a citizen of Pakistan. But the truth is that while I stand proudly under my flag, and I stand proudly under the protection of the Constitution of Pakistan, and I stand with a hope for safety under the protection of God, it is but God and His grace that sustains us. It is but resilience and strength and courage that takes us from one day to the next. Because underneath it all is a simmering truth that any day, anything I say, anything I do, and maybe one day anything I think will be misconstrued to mean that I have blasphemed. I have no desire or no intention to blaspheme. I just want to thrive as a Pakistani and as a Christian, to fulfill what my faith commands that I do, to love the Lord my God and to love my neighbor as myself. One could argue, who is stopping you from loving your God? But it is in the loving of my neighbor that I become a better nurse or a better teacher or a better lawyer and a far better Pakistani. And it is in the loving of my neighbor that the fears of 295C manifest themselves. Because it is in the loving of my neighbor that love can be misconstrued and twisted. A false allegation can be brought against me. And I can put at risk myself and 1,000 around me. Sir, madam, friends, I am a Pakistani Christian. I love my land. It is the purest love I have known. I stand beneath my flag, hand on my heart, Saya-e Khudaya Zul Jalal. But that law, oh, that law.
helps to capture the personal impact that these laws can have. To help set the frame of the response to this, our next two videos, we'll hear from Mr. Raymond Chisti, an MP in the UK Parliament and formerly the UK Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion and Belief, who will frame this. And then we'll hear from Mr. Arafat Mazhar, the CEO of Engage Pakistan, as well as the founder of Puffball Studios, that's produced some really cutting-edge films, short films and other types of animation, documentaries as well, that dive into this issue, going both directly at the legal issues as well as the cultural impact of that. So we'll see a brief trailer from one of their most recent films about this law called Swipe, and then hear a bit more about that. And following those videos, we'll then turn to our panelist.
Hello everyone, I'm absolutely delighted to record this video for the Religious Freedom Institute side event, Neutralizing the Harm of Blasphemy Laws, a religious freedom problem at the 2021 International Religious Freedom Summit. I would like to pay tribute to the Religious Freedom Institute and all NGOs and organizations for their fantastic work championing religious freedom. At the outset, I draw attention to the RFI's Freedom of Religious Institutions in Society, FORIS, policy reports from May 2021. The intersection of blasphemy laws and institutional religious freedom, covering Egypt, Indonesia, Pakistan, and Turkey. These RFI policy reports provide conceptual clarity and concrete recommendations needed to advance religious freedom around the world. Blasphemy laws and the abuse of them is one of the key challenges to religious freedom that we face around the world. In 2020, the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom categorized 30 out of the world's 49 Muslim-majority countries as countries with criminal blasphemy laws and reported cases. Worryingly, the abuse and use of blasphemy laws shows little sign of fading. Since 2014, 6 countries in the world have passed new or amended blasphemy laws. Those being Brunei, Kazakhstan, Mauritania, Morocco, and Oman. Across the world, we can see the very real and dangerous impact that blasphemy laws have. In Pakistan, for example, we saw the case of Asha Bibi, a Christian mother who was accused of blasphemy laws in 2009 and sentenced to death in 2010. She was held in prison until her acquittal in 2018 and was granted asylum in Canada in 2019. I had the honor of meeting Aisha's family and came face to face with the harrowing real-world implications of the abuse of blasphemy laws. The first heartbreaking case demonstrates 2 key issues with blasphemy laws. Firstly, that these laws often are used not just for religious reasons, but to settle land and personal disputes. Second, these issues are usually dealt with at a local level, meaning that undue pressure can easily be applied to the local judiciary and authorities. And we constantly saw delays to justice and miscarriages of justice in the Asha Bibi case until her final acquittal by the Supreme Court of Pakistan. We should encourage cases such as this to be dealt with at a much higher level, the higher courts, where intimidation of judiciary can be avoided and justice can be done more effectively and fairly. In Egypt, the vaguely worded blasphemy laws allows for abusive interpretation. A 2014 study of 36 blasphemy cases over 2 years found that only one case was about defaming Christianity, and all others were accusations of defaming Islam. And just recently, in April 2021, in Algeria, which has a maximum prison term of 5 years for blasphemy law, covered the case of Saad Jabakir, a leading Islamic scholar who was sentenced to 3 years in prison for his allegedly blasphemous academic writings. This is a common, important theme to recognize. Blasphemy laws in Muslim-majority countries are not just used against minority faiths, but they are used and their abuse of these laws are also used against other Muslims to settle personal disputes. A key question is how civil society can work towards tackling blasphemy law abuse. To effect real and lasting change, civil society and local institutions must be involved to stop mob violence and change public opinion. There are three main priorities in promoting institutional religious freedom. The first, avoid passing new laws or amendments to punish blasphemy law. 2, suspend implementation of existing laws. And 3, if possible, repeal existing laws. Where blasphemy laws are already in existence, such as in many Muslim majority countries, the first recommendation, therefore, is not crucial. The third recommendation, repealing these laws, is crucial, but may not be feasible. Hence, policymakers in those countries may prioritize the second recommendation, which is suspending their implementation. For countries such as the United States and the United Kingdom, international cooperation is absolutely vital. The 32-member state International Religious Freedom Alliance, founded by the former US Ambassador at Large, Sam Brownback, of which I had the honor of co-chairing the organization along with the Ambassador from the Netherlands, Josh Juma. That alliance identified addressing blasphemy laws as one of its key themes. And I look forward to what I'm sure will be a fascinating, important discussion on this topic. Thank you so very much.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम नाज़रीन और हज़रात, आज के एपिसोड में हम एक बहुत ही एक्साइटिंग ऐप के बारे में बात करने जा रहे हैं, आई फतवा। जी हाँ, स्वाइप राइट से वाजिबुल कत्ल और स्वाइप लेफ्ट से माफी।
कागज भी वो खाए ने ਤੁਹਾਡੇ वकील ने यस भी कर दी थी। ये सब लोगों ना कि दुकान में जितनी खाली होती है।
ये देखिए, आप एक फोन की स्क्रीन के जरिए और किसी को जाने बगैर और उनकी नीयत को जाने बगैर आप कैसे उनकी जिंदगी का फैसला दे सकते हैं। ये बताएं कि ये जो अंडर बोर्ड है, ये इसका क्या मामला है भाई? मतलब जितने आप मतलब करोगे उतने ज्यादा पॉइंट।
थैंक यू सो मच फॉर ट्यूनिंग इन। हमारी नौजवान नस्ल पर हमें बहुत फख्र है और इंशाल्लाह ये हमें मुल्क दुश्मनों और दीन दुश्मन नासिर से बचाएंगे। थैंक यू सो मच। छोटी सी ब्रेक के बाद वापस आते हैं।
Greetings, everybody, back in DC. I'm really sad I couldn't be there with you guys. You guys just saw a trailer for Swipe. It was sort of like an experiment in space making at Buffalo Studios. Now, I have been working as an activist as well as an academic on the blasphemy laws for more than a decade now. And we've tried and tackled it from a lot of different perspectives, working with various stakeholders. But I've never received a response that is so overwhelmingly positive and open as the one that we did when we released this film. Perhaps because this film does not directly tackle the law as good or bad, but looks at the weaponization of the law and the weaponization of various emotional constructs such as love for the prophet, love for the nation, love for honor, ideas like that, and how that corrupts our next generation, corrupts our society, and how that's weaponized against us by patriarchal, capitalistic power structures. Having said that, as important as that film was for us, and I feel like as important as that film was for having a conversation on religious freedom, if we are to reimagine, reform, reinterpret Pakistan's blasphemy law, especially 295C, then we need to be more imaginative. And we need to move beyond just the limitations of working within a Western tradition of human rights. This is where one of the papers that I wrote with one of my friends, Ann Malvi, comes in. Which just got published in this really wonderful collection of papers on apostasy and blasphemy laws, published by IB Taurus, edited by Muhammad Khalid Masood. And Our paper in this deals very specifically on a very practical step-by-step solution on how to reform 295C. The thesis is very simple. Number one, that there are two crucial contentious features of 295C that we need to understand and deconstruct. Number one, the law's claim that it is divinely ordained, that is HUD. Number two, the law's claimed that this status as HUD enjoys a consensus across the Islamic legal tradition throughout space and time. That is ijma. So HUD and ijma, which are terms from fiqh, which are terms of Islamic legal tradition, gives it the status of immutable God's law. That is, it is divinely ordained, and it has been so throughout the 1400 years of Islamic legal tradition. Now, our paper basically deconstructs, examines these claims from the very text that were cited in the parliament and in the courts of Pakistan during the legislation and interpretation of the law, and concludes that both of these claims are completely false. In fact, you will find resources from within those very texts that claim that non-Muslims cannot be killed, that Muslims can be pardoned. And it is using these traditional texts along with the human rights framework that we've got, along with the legal instruments that the modern state has provided us, that we may be able to find ways of reimagining the law. So what we need now is a multifaceted approach towards reimagining cultural idea of Ishq Rasul and blasphemy through arts and music and film. And then from the policy side and from the legal side, we need to move beyond just human rights and secular Western tradition and re-examine it also from the very tradition that birthed it. It is my hope and opinion that we can imagine these things, work together, and support legislative reforms that can actually work and resonate with people, both in terms of their principles as well as their core beliefs and ideas, so that the world can move forward without any such laws in any of the countries, Muslim and otherwise. Thank you.
I want to go ahead and invite our panelists up to join me, and I'll introduce them as they come. I won't go through their full bios, you can find them online. But we have very distinguished professionals who I also have the privilege to call colleagues, who work with us as senior fellows at the Religious Freedom Institute, and particularly on the project that Raymond mentioned, looking at freedom of religion and institutional religious freedom and its impact on society. And so have with us Professor Paul Marshall, the Wilson Professor at Baylor University, as well as affiliated with the Hudson Center for Religious Freedom, Ms. Farhanaz Isfahani, a senior fellow with IRF, as well as the Wilson Center, and Professor Ahmet Kuru of the San Diego State University. So let me, as we get the mic set, let me start first with Ahmet. And I want to mention a recent book that you so Ahmet, you just wrote a recent book that looks at this on both a historical and a global level, and looking at authoritarianism, and it dives into some of these issues. But so, as we kind of move to the particulars very quickly, can you kind of set the historical framework for us in a minute or two of where these laws came from and their impact?
Thank you, Jeremy. In the world, 70 countries have blasphemy laws, half of them are Muslim majority. In two particular issues, Muslim majority problem is deeper. 35 out of 50 countries have these laws, and their severe punishments is deeper. In 6 countries with capital punishment, all of them are Muslim majority. In the non-Muslim world, Italy had the law with 3 years punishment, which in prison, which has been abolished recently. So in the Muslim world, the problem is deeper than just religious freedom. It impacts socioeconomic underdevelopment, authoritarianism, and recently brain drain. Many young people are leaving their countries because of the lack of freedom. To clarify, let me just compare what I did in my new book, Islam, Authoritarianism and Underdevelopment, comparing the Muslim world in between 6th and mid-11th centuries, when there was certain level of diversity, dynamism, and multiculturalism. Muslims were much more developed than Western Europeans in terms of economy and sciences. They produced cutting-edge philosophers and made many financial innovations and contributions. But things change in the mid-11th century. A Sunni Orthodoxy emerged with what I call ulema-state alliance. And then after it emerged in Central Asia, Iran and Iraq, it moved to Syria and Egypt. And the alliance between Islamic scholars, ulema, and the state marginalized the intellectuals and economic entrepreneurs. That's the problem since mid-11th century, which gradually led to economic and social and intellectual stagnation. And at this point, the very important issue for Muslims to remember how between 8th and mid-11th century, the Islamic ulama were independent, autonomous, and put a separation between themselves and the state authorities, so therefore Islam has a history of separation. So therefore, let me conclude by saying that the problem we see today is more historical and political problem than a religious one. Islam does not reject a separation between religious and political authorities. In fact, it had such a history that should be remembered by both Muslims and non-Muslims today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmet. Farnaz, let's turn to you. As you've worked on this issue in a very personal way in Pakistan as a journalist, a member of parliament, now as a scholar and activist. You've written about it in your book on Pakistan. How do you see the landscape today?
Is my mic on? Why are we having? Hi, can you all hear me today? I'm going to do a really quick introduction so you understand why this is not an academic issue for me solely, though I did write the first comprehensive book on Pakistan's religious minorities, and it is available for all of you who are interested in reading. I have worked on Pakistan's blasphemy laws from the Human Rights Committee in Parliament, on the floor of the Parliament. I've raised my voice for minority communities, be they my Ahmadi Muslim brothers and sisters, my Christian brothers and sisters, my Hindu, my Sikh, my fellow Pakistanis. And I was in Pakistan at a very pivotal stage, which is going to bring me to where the landscape is today, when my colleague in Parliament was a Christian minister called Shahbaz Bhatti. And Shahbaz and I worked together, and Governor Salman Taseer, also of our political party at the time, Pakistan People's Party, both of them took up the case of Asia Bibi and on the amendment of the blasphemy laws. And I was working with them alongside, and they were both murdered. So to continue, I have visited more morgues in Pakistan and seen the dead bodies of people who have been riddled with bullets from the top of their heads to their toes. I want you to understand what blasphemy looks like. Whether it's altercation with a neighbor, whether it's a property dispute, or whether it's pure hatred, that an Ahmadi Muslim cannot even pray or have a Quran, a Holy Quran in their homes and call themselves Muslims. Christians, as we know every day, from Asia Bibi to many others, we got her out. The Pope raised his voice, the international community spoke. But she is one person, there are many more. And so for me, this is not an event, this is my life. And where we are today, Jeremy, with the landscape, I will say, the landscape is bleak. And it is getting more challenging every year. In the first 2 years of Prime Minister Imran Khan's government, 31 members of religious minority communities were killed, 58 were injured, and 25 targeted by blasphemy charges. However, remember, these numbers don't reflect the reality because these are the only ones we have been able to verify. So the numbers are a great deal higher. Those who speak up for victims of these laws in Pakistan, even lawyers and judges, are threatened by extremist groups to be murdered, their children murdered, their families murdered. Often they have to leave the country and we have to resettle them abroad just to be able to give a fair verdict. And sometimes, in some cases, people are just locked up and the key is thrown away. And that's where we are today. So now what all of you here in the room today can do, you can do this. Highlight particular cases, which you have all been doing. Highlight those cases, get behind them, bring the international community, shine that powerful light of truth, and help those individual victims. That is not to say the problem will be cured, but each individual that you rescue continues the light on these pernicious blasphemy laws. So today, I would say, Jeremy, just to wrap this part up, there is no discernible support from the mainstream political parties to amend, change, or do anything about the blasphemy laws. The Prime Minister at the moment himself spoke and said he would give his life protecting these blasphemy laws. So you can understand how bad this is. Then you have the Islamist political parties, you have the leading clerics, and you have all of these people who, when they come to conferences, I've met them in Brussels, they talk a good game. But I am a Pakistani born. I know what they say in Urdu and Punjabi and Pashto. So believe me, the landscape is bleak, and we need every single one of you with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Farah. So, Paul, let's turn to you. Farah took us into. So Farah took us into Pakistan. You worked that much, but much more broader. So, how about the rest of South and Southeast Asia? How do you see the situation there?
If we get a situation like Malaysia, you don't get many cases. But what it means is that everybody has to go on what they say. They're very careful. And, Malaysia has banned at least 4 of my books that I know of, and you might know that for quite a while, Christians were forbidden to use the word Allah for God, even though it's simply the Arabic word for God. That meant you couldn't import Bibles from Indonesia, because of course they would use Allah as a term for God. So here let me emphasize also, the effect of blasphemy laws is not just on the people who are accused or killed or in prison. It's the effect on everybody else who just keeps their mouth shut. About what? We'll get to that. Indonesia, the number There's been radicalizing, still are radicalizing influences. Indonesia, a lot under Saudi influence, also under Pakistani influence. And the number of blasphemy cases has arisen, even under Jokowi, current President Jokowi, who I don't think supports them. The major victims would be people regarded as heterodox Muslims. Ahmadis or so strange groups, Mullah Ibrahim and so on. These are groups which have suffered some state repression. But I'm still very hopeful about Indonesia. You will have heard Pak Yahya this morning. That gives you a very good reason for hope. Let me also mention that his younger brother is the current Minister of Religious Affairs in Indonesia and has spoken in his inaugural speech of the importance of defending people such as Shia or Ahmadis as Indonesian citizens. So not making a theological judgment, says these are Indonesians. It's our job as a government to protect all Indonesians. And you will know of the most famous case of blasphemy in Indonesia, the former governor of Jakarta, usually known as Ahok. Because of a doctored YouTube video, he was accused of blasphemy, convicted and sentenced to 2 years. So this was a major case. The major negative effect of that is the way it divided Indonesia. Yeah, people in families wouldn't talk to each other, wouldn't go to so-and-so's wedding because they took a different view. But in terms of Ahok himself, his conditions of imprisonment were not that hard. And upon being released, he visited all the senior politicians. And now, I don't know if you know, his current job, he's head of the largest company in Indonesia. He was appointed by the president to head the national oil company. So the consequences of the blasphemy conviction there would be very different from in Pakistan, or where he would be a body on the floor. So you see these attempts by senior politicians to ameliorate the effects. And there could be possibilities of emendations of the blasphemy law, softening it. Getting rid of it entirely would at the moment be a bridge too far, but there could be other changes.
Well, if I can borrow your mic.
No, I'll just...
I'll hand it right back to you, because the next question is back to you. And it's something in a book that you wrote on this issue 10 years ago. One of the contributions in that book was a couple of chapters by Muslim scholars dealing with the idea that these laws are about defending Islam and making a case that actually they're problematic for the perception of societies and laws. And Farnaz mentioned the role of religious leaders negatively in supporting these laws, but Pak Yahya and others represent a strong religious argument in dealing with them. Where do you see potential perhaps for the religious majority leaders to be a positive influence on these issues?
I think they can be a very positive influence if you want to convince us here as Muslims that having blasphemy laws, and let me also as an aside, a bigger danger than the law itself is the mob. I don't think, Farah can correct me, I don't think anybody's actually been executed in Pakistan by the state for blasphemy in the modern age. But there are bodies all over the place. People can be acquitted and then killed. So for a serious Muslim, you want a serious Islamic argument as to why these are not good. So you mentioned there with Abdullah Saeed, who's written much on this. He's now in Melbourne. Nasser Abu Zaid's Egyptian, who had to flee Egypt, he's written on this. And then the former Indonesian president, Abdullah Wahid, wrote a very famous essay, which is the foreword to that book now, called God Needs No Defense. And in Indonesia, that's actually a very well-known pop song. it became a pop song after the chapter, not the other way around. But this has a particular influence that if you can convince Muslims that this is, not a required thing in Islam, and then add a few other things. Secondly, they don't work. I mean, there's no evidence that having blasphemy laws stops the level of blasphemy. And thirdly, they increase polarization and division. That sort of repression increases conflict. So you say, if you want to introduce religious harmony or stop people insulting one another's religions, this isn't the way to do it. And if I could add one, this is an answer to a question you haven't asked, but particularly to people in the West, in many cases, the things we're talking about are not usually, except for a tiny percentage, people who go out and insult somebody else's religion. Who are the victims? Religious minorities, in their millions. These are the principal victims we're talking about. A second set of victims is reformers. If there's a repressive form of Islam and you want change, people who call for that sort of change are told they're blasphemous, so they shut up. So these are means of enhancing the power of radicals and shutting up, for want of a better term, moderates. And in the West, when we're playing around with the idea of repressing certain forms of speech, remember, these are the people, remember who the people are who are going to get it in the neck.
Thank you, Paul. Farah, we'll come back to you again. In Arafat, both in the trailer to his video and then in kind of his description about it, they're aiming to influence opinion and in some ways just create space to actually have this conversation. Where do you see kind of opportunities, and thinking of our audience here, NGOs and others, what advice would you give for them as we
I can already tell in this room people prefer what Paul has to say to me. So what I have to say may not be popular, and I have to deal with it. But Paul, who are the moderates you're talking about? In Pakistan, who are the moderates? The reason Arafat left out the question and the use of the word blasphemy from his very good work is why? Because those so-called moderates you're talking about will, it's hate speech, it's getting it wrong, it's tolerance, they're all with you. You use the word blasphemy and they're not moderates anymore. So I want people to think about this a little bit. We need real change in Pakistan, and real change, while I applaud Arafat's work, and I know it has hit a chord with younger people, and it's very positive, this is the kind of work which will resonate much more in the West. NGOs, the Aspen Institute, at religious gatherings, etc. But for real change to occur in Pakistan, it has to be organic, it has to be led by high-level Pakistanis in Pakistan. There have to be the leadership of the mainstream political parties, the leadership of the clerical institutions, the leadership of the Islamist parties. So we have to sit here and think, how do our governments here engage? Is it sanctions we talk about, or are there more positive ways? Can we examine the curriculum at schools where you have to pass an Islamiyat O-level or matriculate with Islamiyat, no matter what faith you believe in, and a Pakistan studies? Can we have a humanities course that the US and the EU can ask for to be added? Why is education not a federal subject? Why is it that only states decide on their own education syllabi? So what I'm talking about, this is a very big picture thing we're looking at with a lot of smaller parts. But that's really, honestly, the only way we're going to get anywhere. So basically, the one more comment I would really say, Arafat's film does present one attempt at really trying to reshape public opinion around addressing these laws. Obviously, legal reform is also needed. So everyone here, the international community, NGOs like those represented here, need to focus their efforts, but it has to be a holistic effort. So basically, where are we today with the landscape? That effort has not started. And well, Paul was talking about all these theologians who had very positive views. I'll give you two examples from Pakistan. Going back to the 1960s, there have been great Islamic scholars like Dr. Fazlur Rahman of the University of Chicago, whose modernist interpretations were respected internationally. Now, he's the kind of person you would call to a conference and say, oh, that's the kind of Muslim we can talk to. But what happened to him? But the ulama in Pakistan declared him a heretic and pushed him out of the Council of Islamic Ideology. Another brilliant Islamic scholar who's beloved in Pakistan and had a prime-time TV show watched by millions was hounded by death threats to leave the country because he refused to declare Ahmadi Muslims as heretics. So I am here, unfortunately, saying we have a lot of work ahead, and let's get to it. That's what I do.
Thank you. They do like what you have to say. Ahmet, the final question goes to you. In the framing for the event, we're talking about this new policy report, looking at religious institutions, and it picks up on some of the points that Farnaz is making about the need for institutions to have within their own scholarship internally, this internal debate, but then also what they contribute in society at large, in the political process, in other ways. So from that policy report and the FORIS project more broadly, what are maybe some of the observations that looking at these issues through that lens gives to this challenge?
Thank you, Jeremy. So in the Religious Freedom Institute, we publish a policy report for making recommendations on this multi-level problem. And we encourage the rulers and the public opinion makers and the people of Muslim majority countries with these laws to stop passing new laws and abrogate, if possible, the existing. If it is too utopian, we ask them to embrace the European way that Europeans kept these blasphemy laws at that letters without implementation for over a century. That's maybe a middle ground recommendation. For the future, two things make me optimistic. One thing is that, as I briefly mentioned in my first part, was that this problem is mostly historically constructed, particularly in two episodes of history. Because when we look at the Quran, there are about 140 verses about compassion, peace, toleration, mutual understanding. About the particular issue of blasphemy. For example, you see in the Baqarah chapter, La ikraha fid din, which means no compulsion in religion. Then in Surah Nisa, in the 4th chapter, you see that specifically God tells the Muslims, if you see those who are making fun of the verses in this book, the Quran, leave them and do not come back to the gathering unless they change the topic. So it implicitly say if they change the topic, you can sit them and talk to them again. There is no other action taking other than leaving the gathering when they make fun of the verses of the Holy Book. But despite the fact that the Quran has these specific verses, and when we look at the Sunnah, basically means the Prophet's way of life. There is no report that he himself killed someone for blasphemy, apostasy, or ordered such a punishment in his lifestyle. And therefore, either the Quran or Sunnah didn't have anything about that. But the literal notion became dominant in two episodes. One is the 11th century change, as I mentioned. In a very specific case, Ghazali, a prominent Muslim scholar, in his very famous book, Tahafatul Falasafa, the inconsistencies of philosophers, he attacks strongly philosophers like Farabi, Ibn Sina, and in the last 2 pages, he declared them apostates for 3 reasons, punishable by that. That was very unfortunate legacy of Ghazali, a very important genius scholar with very interesting ideas. And then after that, Ulama State Alliance picked up this idea and imposed to punish any dissenting religious and political views in the classical era. Then in the 18th, 19th century, many reforms, including the abolishment of apostasy law by the Ottomans. So the Ottomans themselves abolished it. When it came back, resurfaced in the last 40, 50 years, after the Iranian Revolution, many Muslim majority countries experienced Islamization. Zia al-Haq in Pakistan, 1997, Sharia law and everything. Then in Egypt, a more bottom-up Islamization. Even in Turkey, certain level of Islamization. And the Islamists, since their political agenda is so thin, they make this issue a big case to receive popular support. So, therefore, out of the 2 things make me optimistic about the future. One is that a reform possible by being respectful to the tradition of Islam, because the holy text, the Quran, or the Prophet's life give inspiration for freedom. The second thing, and I will conclude by that, which makes me optimistic, is that there is a new generation coming, young people, in Turkey, Iran, Arab countries, and elsewhere. And they are reacting to Islamization. We have public surveys showing that in Iran, 50% of people, especially young, are very secularized. In Turkey, secularization, even the rise of deism, rejecting Islamism, and some of them rejecting Islam. So, I hope that this will not end up with a reactionary French laïcité type, assertive secularist authoritarianism. Otherwise, we'll end up with a circle of assertive Islamism, assertive secularism, assertive secularism, assertive Islamism. I hope the young generation will find a middle ground, putting Islamists aside, but also bringing democracy and religious freedom rather than anti-religious secularism. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmet. For the final word, we've heard about some of the need for religious work, is for work on the political sphere, and we wish he was able to join us in person, but the final word would go to Raymond Chisti, joining us from London, to wrap up with a few concluding words to take us home. So thank you so much, Raymond, for joining us.
Thank you so very much, and I'm really sorry that I could not be with this wonderful man in Washington. I'd like to say a big thank you to that guy, stakeholders, what they have done to bring forth very important issues.
Raymond, we're having one issue.
Can you hear me now?
Can you try one more time?
Sure. Jeremy, I have to say it's a real pleasure to be able to take part in this panel and to sum this discussion by the panel. Can you hear me?
No.
So I think we'll add a recording of this to our website to conclude this and to wrap up a summary of this. But Carlos has a last word of hope to bring us home as we transition to the next event.
I don't want to break Jeremy's heart, and I don't break the hearts of the almost 200 million Pakistanis either. As I said, we just need a big new overall plan and a new way of thinking. And that's what we need to do now. And it's a big challenge ahead, but we're all up for the challenge. At least I am, and I know my colleagues are too. So thank you, Jeremy. Thank you to RFI and Chomfa, and for all the phenomenal work I've been lucky enough to do with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for more on our work, you can visit the Religious Freedom Institute at rfi.org. Thank you very much.